Good morning. The Asian pear has a 3,000-year history in China and Japan. But in the United States, its history dates back almost exactly 200 years. And the person who brought the Asian pear to the United States was the noted horticulturalist William Prince. This was back in 1820. He had an 80-acre estate in Flushing, New York, and he was the importer of many other fruit trees and vines and things like that. He introduced the Isabella grape and also the Bartlett pear, with which I'm sure you are familiar. So anyway, he brought the Asian pear to the United States, and that's the beginning. I'm not sure if he was the one who popularized it, but soon the Asian pear was making its way across the country, and eventually it made its way all the way to California and has been cultivated around the United States for the past 200 years. So there are various types of Asian pears, and they have different characteristics. So I'm going to generalize for you here. And this is a fruit that I have planted several times, but two of my trees are really not mature at this point. Only one of them has matured. That tree is at a school where I used to volunteer, and I no longer have access to that without permission, so I don't get a lot of the fruit from that tree. I'm really looking forward to more fruit from my own, and so it's probably going to take a couple of years. However, I do know something about this tree, and so I'm going to share what I know with you and also what I've learned by doing a little research online. So the fruit itself, this is one of the real reasons that I like the Asian pear, is that the fruit I find very, very appealing. The Asian pear, its texture and flavor are different from both the apple and the pear, and yet it has similarities to both. It's more similar in shape to the apple, but in flavor probably closer to the pear. The texture, however, is unique, at least in the varieties that I've tasted. Much more crisp. It's almost as if you took a piece of celery and took the strings out of it and then matched it with a very sweet flavor. It's almost like a honey lemon flavor in my favorite varieties, but I'm sure that there are different flavors that you get from different types of Asian pears. The storage of this pear it can be quite long. From what I understand, it doesn't always taste great after about 3 months. It tastes more like wine. It's kind of a strong wine flavor. But it will store quite well in low temperatures, just above freezing, for 1 to 3 months. So it's a good storage fruit, but I've also canned Asian pears and had really good luck with that, in the same way that you would can other sliced fruit in a sugar syrup. And the result was really tasty. It was as good, if not better, than the other pears that I have canned, and easier to work with, because when the Asian pear is ripe, it is still crisp. Whereas if you want to get your Anjou or Bartlett pears at the peak of ripeness for canning, they're going to be a softer pear, and so when you can them, they can start to break apart. Whereas the Asian pear will stay together and stay more firm through the canning process. So that's a big benefit. The growth habit of an Asian pear is very similar to apples or pears, and the acidity of soil is kind of similar. It likes a slightly acid soil. I tend to train mine, as I do with my apples and pears. I train mine as kind of like a flat wall of trees, which I will put on the side of my garden where it won't cast shade on the rest of it. So in my case, that's the north side of my garden. The pear, at least in my experience, it grows on the slower side. The Asian pears that I've grown, the trees haven't grown spectacularly quickly. Now that could be due to a number of different factors, but it's taken several years. And my pear trees that I planted at the same time, my Bartlett's and Anjou pears, are a little bit taller. My Liberty apple that I planted 2 years ago, along with my first two Asian pears in this yard. So I planted a few Asian pears at the school that I used to volunteer at probably 6 years ago. But the ones that I planted here was only a couple of years ago. Now the Liberty apple that I planted at the same time has already had a couple of apples on it in year 2, which is pretty quick. These weren't tall trees. They're probably about 3 feet tall when I bought them, so just sticks. The Asian pears, they're not growing as quickly, and they are not branching out as far. So I still am lacking some experience in growing these fruit. From what I do understand, though, they have some disease resistance, and they are an easy fruit to grow. So this is these are some of the many reasons that I'm growing the Asian pear. They can also cross-pollinate with European pears, and that can be a handy trait. However, the Asian pear tends to flower on the earlier side, where European pears will flower a little later. There is some crossover in that, depending on the varieties of Asian pear and European pear. The Asian pear and European pear are both of the same genus, that is Pears, but there are two different genuses of Asian pears that I know of. So one of them is Pyrifolia, which is the Japanese variety, and one is Eurasiensis, which is the Chinese variety. So it's Pyrus pyrifolia and Pyrus eurasiensis. Those are the two varieties that I know of, but these break down into lots of different types of pear trees and with different characteristics. Now, there's also I'm not sure of which these two are. I'm not sure which species the Korean pear, the Korean giant pear is, but that's a particularly long storage pear, and it's a very large fruit as well. So it's kind of just an interesting pear, and I've planted one of those in my yard already, but it hasn't started producing fruit. So those are the reasons that I grow the Asian pear. I think if you're curious about Asian pears, pick one up in the grocery store. It's not going to be as good as what you would grow on your own, and sometimes the grocery store varieties can be quite flavorless. When you grow them fresh, when you grow them yourself, or when you find a really good one in the grocery store, it's honey sweet. It's very, very delicious. It is crisp, like I described. In fact, by the time it starts getting soft, it's usually past its prime. So it's one of those fruits that you have to tell just by tasting whether or not it is ready. So you'll have to, a little trial and error at the beginning of harvesting season will help you decide when to pick your Asian pears. So that is my experience with the Asian pears. The ones that I will be growing, like I say, I'm going to grow flat. I'm going to grow basically a wall along my fence. This will give me a little bit of privacy. I've done this with European pears in the past, and it's worked out really well for defining space. And that's one of the great things that I like to do with fruit trees, is use them to define space. They don't have to take up your entire yard. If you can train them in a way that will fit into almost any situation. Some people will train fruit trees just to grow as a pole, and they'll plant them really close together. Some people will train them flat, like I'm talking about, or you can just let it grow in its normal growth habit, which tends to be more like a conical tree. So different options for different yards, for different situations. And this is what's great about fruit trees, is you really can make them fit into almost any kind of space that you're trying to plant in. The one more thing is that they prefer full sun, but they're partially shade tolerant from what I have read. And so that's good to know. And also, they prefer to grow in zones 5 to 8. They do need a certain number of chill hours in order to work. So if you're trying to grow them in a hardiness zone warmer than zone 8, you may have a little bit of trouble unless you have enough days below 45 degrees. And so from what I understand, that is like at least like 30 days or so. I'll put the actual numbers on the screen. So chill hours. Now, this is a lot of that kind of information is speculative. If you get enough cold days, they'll probably work. And enough, I think, people can make estimates, but I don't know if anybody really knows precisely what the exact number of chill hours or chill days an Asian pear needs. And with different varieties, I'm sure there are, different requirements. So a little bit of research before you plant anything will go a long way. So thank you for joining me. I hope that this was a new topic for you, and if so, I hope you will explore it a little further. Asian pears are some of my favorite fruit, so just a thought for your food forest garden, or for your yard, or for any situation where you might want to have a fruit tree and some fruit for your table. Thanks again for joining me. You can find more of my work on Instagram at Food Forest Garden Club, also at Food Forest Card Game. And you can find the Garden Club website at foodforestgardenclub.org, where we get together actually in person on Zoom chats. We share information, experience. We group orders together to buy things for at least the region that I'm in. And as we get larger, we'll be grouping orders probably for other regions around the country. So it's a really good way to join a garden club community and help grow with us and teach us some of the things that you know and learn from the people who are already in the club. So I hope you join us there, and I look forward to seeing you again tomorrow. Thanks a lot.